Tonight on Bridge City News, Lethbridge police charged 2 people in their 20s in connection with a couple of robberies in our city. Alberta's South Zone now has its first confirmed case of COVID-19. The AHS has an online tool to see if you need to be tested for the coronavirus. And researchers south of the border have given healthy volunteers in Washington state the first shot of an experimental coronavirus vaccine. We have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta government has declared a state of emergency. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney made the announcement earlier today as his government is finding the best ways possible of helping Albertans through this crisis.
The situation is very serious, and we are taking action more effectively to protect Albertans against this pandemic. Last night, we held a meeting of our Emergency Management Committee of Cabinet, which authorized me to use all powers necessary to keep Albertans safe. That's why today I am announcing that Alberta is declaring a state of public emergency in response to COVID-19. This declaration is meant to empower authorities under the Public Health Act to more effectively manage the pandemic response. Decisive action is needed, and we are taking that action. The Emergency Management Committee of Cabinet met again this morning, and in response to the escalating numbers of infections, Dr. Hinshaw and her team have also recommended new measures on social distancing to contain the spread of the virus, and the Government of Alberta has accepted those recommendations. So in addition to declaring a public health emergency, the Alberta government is moving forward with aggressive new measures to contain the virus. Any organized gathering of more than 50 people are to be cancelled immediately. All Albertans are prohibited from attending public recreational facilities and private entertainment facilities such as casinos, bingo halls, bars, theaters, and children's play centers until further notice.
The Government of Alberta announced that we have our first confirmed case of COVID-19, otherwise known as the coronavirus, here in the South Zone. That brings the total number of cases in Alberta to 74. Our province had 18 new cases yesterday alone, most in the Calgary region. The Stampede City declared a state of emergency on Sunday night. Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi ordered all city-owned and operated facilities and pools and libraries to close. The same is also taking place here in Lethbridge. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman says the city has also opened an emergency coordination centre. Meanwhile, Chief Roy Fox from the Blackfoot Confederacy, not far from Lethbridge, has also declared a state of emergency on the Blood Reserve. Alberta Health Services has set up an online tool so you can self-check to see if you need to be tested for COVID-19. The address is ahs.ca/COVID. You can complete the assessment for yourself or on behalf of someone else. Most of the testing is currently focused on those who have recently traveled outside of Canada or had contact with someone diagnosed as having COVID-19. Alberta Health Services also says that all travelers who return to Alberta from outside of Canada on or after March 12th are required to self-isolate immediately for 14 days and monitor for symptoms. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Parliament will likely sit again to pass emergency measures for the economy during the COVID-19 pandemic. He also promised a major announcement on supporting the economy, but played down the idea of invoking a national state of emergency.
We are hard at work to create the right support package for Canadians while protecting people's jobs and our economy. And tomorrow, we will be making another major announcement on economic actions to support Canadians as quickly as possible. By the end of the week, we will have more to say about changes for the upcoming tax season. We're looking at giving more flexibility for people to make payments and for businesses to have more liquidity during this time. Throughout this, we're working together right across the country. I have directed the House Leader to engage with his counterparts to discuss a brief return of the House of Commons so that we can bring in emergency economic measures. There are economic pieces that will need quick passage through the House in order to support Canadians.
Ottawa's announced new measures to combat COVID-19, which includes a partial border closure and new screening for arrivals. Federal cabinet ministers sought to explain them and how important it is to maintain Canada's vital relationship with the United States. Federal Transport Minister Marc Garneau says certain airports may become a lot busier.
All flights from Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America will be diverted to the Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver airports. Flights from the U.S., the Caribbean, and Mexico can continue to land at their scheduled Canadian destinations.
By limiting international flights to our 4 main airports, it allows for the concentration and efficient use of our limited resources. As we will identify ill passengers before they arrive, they'll be met at the gate by border security officers, isolated from passenger processing areas, and referred immediately to public health officials. And finally, by significantly reducing the number of non-Canadian travelers, we will see a significant reduction in those traveling to Canada, and therefore a reduction in those who need to be processed.
As you have heard on Bridge City News, classes have all been canceled for students kindergarten through grade 12 in the province. The superintendent of Lethbridge School District number 51, Dr. Cheryl Gilmore, released a letter to parents regarding next steps. In her letter, Gilmore says although students are at home, staff remain fully engaged with preparing for student learning in the new reality. The province will let us know what the expectations are with respect to breadth of content, and staff will work collaboratively to determine the most effective way to support students. We anticipate that processes for students' learning will be communicated and in place by early next week. Local businesses in Lethbridge have been hit hard by the impact of the coronavirus. As Micah Quinn explains, a staple of the community has had to temporarily shut its doors, and other businesses are taking the necessary steps in order to protect themselves and their customers.
Local businesses in Lethbridge have felt the hit of COVID-19 hard, and Top Pizza and Spaghetti House is especially worried.
Your small business operator like me, we need sales every day to pay. What I've been putting out on social media for the last couple days is support your local guy.
Casson has decided to shut down the dining room of his restaurant and only do takeout and delivery.
We've been open since 1968. We have 3 and 4 generations of customers. Their safety is more important than money in the till.
The movie mill has decided to temporarily shut down, and tonight will be their last movie showing. This will be taken as a precaution to protect moviegoers against the coronavirus.
We figure we would be ahead of this and close before the government forced us to, but certainly with Regal and AMC in the U.S. closing, and Cineplex and Landmark closing, and various provincial jurisdictions closing, the writing was on the wall.
Binning says it could be tough for the movie mill to stay open if he has to keep it closed for over a few months.
If it's a few weeks, we can weather that storm. If it's a few months, we will be challenged. I won't beat around the bush. We have significant costs, whether we're open or closed, and that's without wages and cost of product, but leases and utilities and insurance and benefits and things like that. So we're certainly hoping this doesn't go any longer than 2 months.
Top Pizza and Spaghetti House and the Movie Mill are just a few of the local businesses in Lethbridge that are looking for a light at the end of the tunnel during this hard time. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
South of the border, governors and mayors have closed restaurants, bars, and other non-essential gathering places across the United States in an effort to slow the spread of the novel coronavirus.
I understand the urgency of everything, and we're in uncharted territory here, but it's just such gross unpreparedness.
This is totally uncharted territory for us. I've been here for over 50 of those 66 years that we've been open, and I've seen a lot of things happen: 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, 2 blackouts, water main breaks.
Financially, it's a very nerve-wracking thing to hear. I woke up in the morning and I heard the news that tomorrow I won't go to work for nobody knows until when, and it's a really scary thing to know about. Like, maybe I have enough money for rent, but what else am I going to need, or what happens if I get sick?
Ontario's top medical official is recommending that all bars and restaurants close, with the exception of those that do takeout and delivery. Dr. David Williams is also recommending that all private schools and daycares close, along with places of worship.
We're taking a number of steps to increase the social distancing, the aspects in consistent with our partners and others at the federal level. We're talking about some additional closures. So we're going to be moving on. The new number is 50. So groups greater than 50, we're not asking those to be meeting. And they would cancel those or decrease them somehow to a smaller size in that aspect. We'd like that to take place as soon as possible, knowing some will take a while. I'm not talking about weeks, I'm talking about a few days or whatever to get that in place.
BC's Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, announced 3 COVID-19 deaths and 30 new cases yesterday, bringing the total number in her province to 103 cases. Henry says the 3 deaths were all residents of a North Vancouver long-term care home where a man in his 80s died of COVID-19 last week.
The sad news is that we've had 3 additional deaths that have been reported over the last few days, and all of them have been residents in the Lynn Valley Care Centre, where we know we've been dealing with an outbreak for the last week and a bit.
Our country's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, says now is the time for Canadians to work together to slow the spread of COVID-19. She is urging everyone to avoid all public gatherings of 50 people or more.
All Canadians must act now to take all precautions and practice social distancing in order to interrupt chains of transmission, to delay and suppress the epidemic curve of COVID-19. Most of Canada's cases continue to be travel-related, so public health authorities across Canada are continuing with strong efforts to detect cases, trace, and manage contacts. COVID-19 is a serious public health threat. This disease and this outbreak will disrupt our lives. For many of us, that may mean we are ill or our family members are ill, or that work, social functions, childcare, and other aspects of our lives are disrupted.
U.S. researchers have given healthy volunteers in Seattle, Washington, the first shot of an experimental coronavirus vaccine. Bridge City News was brought inside the exam room where the study's first participant received an injection.
Everybody's feeling so helpless right now, and I realized that there was something that I could do to help, and I'm excited to be here.
We are conducting the first test of the first vaccine against the new coronavirus that has made it this far to be eligible for testing in humans. So we're getting the first information possible about something that could potentially help in the future.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, says that a lab in Israel is also working hard on a vaccine for the coronavirus. She says, however, that it could take over a year before it could be made available.
This lab in Israel was coincidentally testing something very similar or the same type. Coronaviruses existed before this strain of coronavirus, but this particular one or something very similar to it was being tested in Israel. So we kind of got a bit of a head start, not much, but again, they're saying if you think this is going to be rushed anything less than 18 months, then we would be rushing it at our own risk.
Lisa will have more on COVID-19 and how it is severely impacting Europe coming up in the second half of our show. A 20-year-old Lethbridge man has been charged in connection with a cab driver who was robbed at knife point on Sunday night. Just before midnight, Lethbridge police responded to a report of a female taxi driver who was robbed at the 7-Eleven along Columbia Boulevard West. After driving the suspect a short distance, he pulled out a knife, held it to her throat, and demanded cash. The driver yelled for help. A man in the area got the suspect away from the cab driver, chased him down, and recovered the money. The perpetrator got away but was arrested a short time later. Taz Gooddagger of Standoff faces a long list of charges, including robbery. He is scheduled to appear in court on June 16th. Lethbridge police have also charged a 23-year-old woman in connection with a robbery and the assault of 2 seniors. Last Wednesday, police were called to a film festival at the Lethbridge Public Library. They say a woman stole a laptop along with 2 cups of hot coffee. As she was headed out the door, she was confronted by 2 seniors and threw hot coffee at both of them, causing first-degree burns. A security guard was alerted, who rushed to assist the women and recovered the laptop. The female subject fled but was arrested 4 days later. 23-year-old Cheyenne Tilley of Raymond is charged with robbery and assault with a weapon. She's scheduled to appear in court on April the 9th. We live in uncertain times. The infectious disease known as COVID-19 or the novel coronavirus has impacted so many in such a short period of time. Miracle Channel CEO Leon Fontaine says we should not live in fear and as a message of encouragement.
We live in challenging times. This coronavirus that everyone is worried about has created fear and hysteria, even amongst officials. And we live in a world with television and social media where everyone has access to all of those reports that are fearful. I want to encourage you that we are a people of faith. We are a people who are encouraged. We are a people who believe that God will help us. So let's pray for our leaders. Let's make sure that we don't live in fear, because we will never be at our creative best. We will never have the courage to get up and bring change if we give in to fear. Make sure that you understand that the Bible teaches us that's the victory that overcomes every storm on this planet, is you and I having faith that God will see us through. Father, we pray right now for our leaders. We pray right now for our health officials. We ask you to guide them, to lead them. Let wisdom prevail, and let all those who are just spreading fear be stopped. Father, we thank you for blessing over Canada, and all that we put our hands to as Canadians. Guide us into our future, I pray, in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Be watching the Miracle Channel as we bring specials and updates, as well as on our social media, that'll guide you and give you a faith perspective in the middle of this storm.
It was great to see the sunshine again today, wasn't it? But the mercury will be dropping, bringing cooler temperatures and more flurries. Complete weather details are coming up. We had lots of sunshine again today and mild. Tonight, periods of snow developing, the low near -12. Tomorrow, more flurries developing with a high near -4. Thursday, mainly cloudy with a daytime high of only -8. The mercury should climb on Friday. Expect sunshine and a high near +1. Saturday, just a few clouds developing with a high of -1. Sunny and 7 degrees for Sunday. Monday, a few clouds again with a high of 4. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 6 degrees and an average low of -6. The highest temperature in this state was recorded in 2007 at 19 degrees, and the record low was -29 in 1943. Sunrise was at 7:40, sunset at 7:39. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, expect lots of sun and a high of 13 degrees in Victoria, BC. Vancouver will also be sunny and a high of 14. Expect snow and -7 in Calgary on Wednesday. Flurries and -7 degrees as well for Edmonton. Overcast and -6 for Regina. Saskatoon will be partly cloudy and -10 tomorrow. Expect periods of snow and a high of -6 in Winnipeg. Increasing cloud and 3 degrees for Toronto. Lots of sunshine and 5 is on tap for Ottawa. Just a few clouds and 4 degrees for Montreal tomorrow. In Atlantic Canada, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be mainly sunny and 5. Sunshine and 4 degrees for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Charlottetown, PEI will be 0 under a mainly sunny sky. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain mixed with snow and a high near 5 for tomorrow. WestJet Airlines says it will suspend all international flights, including to the United States, for 30 days. The changes, which are to help control the spread of COVID-19, will begin on Sunday. The final Canada-bound flights taking off from international destinations will leave by 11:50 p.m. local time that night. After that, the airline says it will operate rescue and repatriation flights. Domestic flights will still run, but WestJet says the schedule will be reduced by 50%. More and more companies are sending emails to their customers and posting notices that they're closing down temporarily or doing takeout orders only due to the COVID-19 outbreak. David's Tea closed more than 230 stores in Canada and the U.S. Second Cup, meanwhile, is only serving food and drinks to go, either for delivery or via drive-through. Makeup retailer Sephora is closing its stores and is taking online orders only. A new survey suggests the early economic impacts of the coronavirus on small to medium-sized businesses in Canada has been massive. The online survey by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business finds half of small business respondents have already seen a drop in sales. 4 in 10 of those affected said sales had declined more than 25%. The CFIB survey found that hospitality, arts and recreation, and retail sectors were getting hit the hardest, with 20% already starting temporary layoffs. Stocks are up after U.S. President Donald Trump promised that he's going ahead with big plans to help the economic pain caused by the coronavirus outbreak. This comes a day after he publicly acknowledged the U.S. is dealing with the coronavirus pandemic until July or August.
We had market close down 3,000 yesterday, definitely off of the the final news conference that the president had, really throwing out those words of July and August. I think that kind of spooked everybody into a market that was already anxious, right? So we closed at the lows. Overnight, I think they're obviously negotiating some bailouts, some stimulus and whatnot, what they can do economically. I'm not sure that it's clear the market's telling us it's not enough. Overnight, the market did rally up. I was watching it all night. That's how crazy I am. At 1 in the morning, it was up 800-900 points. That was a reasonable bounce relative to days that are down. There's always going to be a buyer somewhere within marketplaces, whether it's what we call a dead cat bounce, whether it's a relief rally, whatever you want to call it. But it's not sustainable. You need those things to really carry through. It's starting to feel a little bit to me like the financial crisis, in that we're going from lowering interest rates as a booster and a cushion to a market that's failing, to stimulus packages, which I think are going to be broad and will be helpful.
There has been a lot of talk about how we as Canadians need to cut down on our carbon footprint. Dr. Gregory Wrightstone is a geologist and author of the Amazon best-selling book, Inconvenient Facts. Dr. Wrightstone says CO2 is not necessarily as bad as governments make it out to be.
The average was an increase of 46% of biomass, the weight of crop growth. That's a good thing. That's not just a good thing, it's a really good thing. And because of increased CO2, we can feed the hungry. And around the world, people are benefiting from this.
Catch the full interview with Dr. Wrightstone discussing what he says are misconceptions about climate change. That is coming up after business news. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The markets have rebounded nicely today. The TSX was up 324 points to 12,685. The Dow was up 1,048 points to 21,237. The S&P 500 was up 143 points to 2529. And the Nasdaq was up 430 points to 7334. Oil was down $1.88 today to $26.82 per barrel. Natural gas was down 9 cents to $1.72. Gold was up 10 cents to $15.2840 an ounce. And silver was down a penny at $12.61 an ounce. Wheat is at $228 per metric ton. Barley's also at $228. Canola's at $4.49, and corn is at $256 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $4.50 to $96.35. Feeder cattle were up $5.05 to $115.25, and lean hogs were up $4.50 to $58.48. The Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day to $70.43 US. We have some breaking news for you this hour. The province of Alberta now has 3 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the South Zone. That brings the total number of confirmed cases in Alberta to 97. Premier Jason Kenney has announced a state of emergency for our province. That means mass gatherings are now limited to no more than 50 attendees. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is promising financial help for those struggling to cope as COVID-19 spreads. Trudeau says Ottawa will make a major announcement on economic actions tomorrow. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, is coming up next with details of how close we are to having a COVID-19 vaccine developed. That interview is on deck. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Woods Homes Emergency Youth Shelter The Core helps families struggling with parent-adolescent conflict by providing crisis support. The shelter is open from 5 p.m. to 8:30 a.m. every day. They also offer professional counseling, referrals, and housing first supports throughout the day. For more information, visit woodshomes.ca or call 1-800-563-6106. Big Brothers Big Sisters in Lethbridge is searching for volunteers to mentor children and youth in their various programs. Volunteers commit anywhere from 1 hour a week to 1 full year. They have many kids on their wait list that are looking for a big brother or sister. Make a difference in a child's life and start something big. For more information, call 403-328-9355 or email info.leth@bigbrothersbigsisters.ca. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help serve hot meals, assist with Foot Friday, and help sort incoming donations. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
There's finally some good news in regards to the coronavirus. A vaccine trial has begun this week. To talk more about it is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, word is the vaccine being developed at a lab in Israel will take around, 18 months?
Yeah, it just goes to show you what goes into developing a vaccine, having the trials, going through all the different rounds of testing before something can come out onto the market. It's not going to be in this, in the current, it's not going to catch the momentum, is what I'm trying to say. This lab that you speak of in Israel, and I know Canada, the United States, and others in various labs are attempting to do the same. But this lab in Israel was coincidentally testing something very similar or the same type. Coronaviruses existed before this strain of coronavirus, but this particular one or something very similar to it was being tested in Israel. So we kind of got a bit of a head start, not much, but again, they're saying if you think this is going to be rushed, anything less than 18 months, then we would be rushing it at our own risk. It's not going to be something that's going to be usable. So that's why the experts are warning the only way to stop the speed at which this is spreading and has become a global pandemic is to self-quarantine, to stay away as much as possible, to work from home, not leave home, particularly the age demographic 65 and over, that it would affect more drastically than the younger segments of the population.
Yeah, a lot of business owners have closed their businesses for now temporarily. I don't know how a lot of the small businesses will survive. A lot of schools have canceled classes. And where you are in California, your governor has closed, a lot of the bars, wineries, and there's some home isolation as well for seniors.
Yeah, so in California, they have now required that those over 65 not leave home. And of course, those in nursing homes as well, and bars and clubs, lounges, etc., gyms, dance studios, all mandatory closures. You know how it's very difficult. I know many of our friends here have canceled, those who come to their home to clean, or their nannies or babysitters. They're canceling doctor's appointments. They're canceling, anything that's not an absolute emergency, and electing to stay home. And as you said, that's putting a huge burden on these individuals, on the economy. How will these people pay their bills? And as you know, those bills go on, even though they're not working and not bringing in an income, particularly for the day workers. So, this is going to be, it's going to be something very serious to speak of. But, the government's doing what they can to mitigate the economic effects at the very least. And hopefully, again, as I said, they're urging people to be cautious, to be pragmatic, not to go out if they don't have to. And the sooner we can kind of flatten the curve, as they say, then the sooner people can go back to business as usual and continue with their lives.
Dr. Dina Henshaw, who's the Chief Officer of Health here, Medical Officer of Health in Alberta, she's talked a lot about social distancing, making sure you wash your hands. But I've noticed here, especially in the airports here and south of the border, there's not a lot of social distancing, as thousands of people are arriving from Europe, some possibly sick with COVID-19.
Yes, Hal, if you've seen these photos, and I'm sure you have, the people are literally standing back to back to back to back, and you just can feel them breathing on each other. And, so much for social distancing and so much for keeping within 6 feet of each other. My cousin's wedding was actually canceled this past Saturday night because the mandate here was that you cannot gather more than 250 people. And if there are fewer than 250 people, then there has to be a situation where people can at least stand 6 feet apart, where in a wedding, they could not do that. And here you're looking at the airports where we do have a travel ban to Europe, but how about from places like Europe and elsewhere where you see these people at the airport, they're just packed like sardines and obviously breathing all over each other. I know here at the local airport at LAX, there was yet another TSA worker who came down with the virus just in the past 24 hours. So, again, if you don't have to travel, don't. And if you're coming back into the country, well, I know you have to pass through the airport, but otherwise there should be a 14-day quarantine that follows your arrival.
The novel coronavirus has dominated the early stage of the Joe Biden-Bernie Sanders Democratic debate. Lisa, both White House hopefuls portrayed themselves as better equipped to handle the crisis than U.S. President Donald Trump.
Right. So there's a lot of politicizing of this. As the political climate in the United States has been so politicized that whether, however this would have been handled, there would have been criticism. So at first, if you recall, Donald Trump called the travel ban from China, and he was called a xenophobe by actually Joe Biden himself. And, it was criticized, how could he prevent people of Chinese origin from coming into this country? Well, they have a virus that we don't want to catch. And now when we're this deep into it, we're wondering why he didn't do it sooner, why he didn't, prepare the kits sooner, everything sooner. And meanwhile, when he did take action, it was criticized. So, I think it's in very poor taste to politicize this. It's in very poor taste to say that they could have done a better job. I think right now the only thing we can do as Americans is to say, let's try our best to keep everyone alive and safe and healthy. I know Canada's dealing with this, and I know Trudeau, it hit so close to home for him and his wife. And again, it's hit everyone. That's the bottom line here, that no one is immune. It's hit Hollywood, like Tom Hanks and his wife. It's hit people that are high in power. We know Brazil and Bolsonaro and his family and their advisors and the people who surround them, and the Iranian regime. And the list goes on. So, this is not a time where we can sit and point fingers, but to do what's best to curb this.
Iran has reported its single biggest day jump of coronavirus deaths. The president of Iran has ruled out quarantine, and officials are warning of overwhelmed healthcare facilities, no doubt.
Right. Obviously, this is overwhelming for the people of Iran, for the health facilities that are already suffering because of the sanctions. And I say this, there's such a nuance here that is not being portrayed in the media. They aren't suffering because of sanctions, but because of the sanctions, the government has created a void in the health arena that has existed from before coronavirus, because they can blame the United States and the West and say, well, there are sanctions, therefore you cannot get your cancer treatment, therefore you cannot get your diabetes medication, etc. And that is how they created this hatred for the West and a movement to have people push against sanctions and to petition to have the sanctions removed. Now, the Iranian government would want nothing more than a distraction, because as you remember, just a month ago, the people were still out on the streets, they were still protesting, and now what are the people doing? They're worried about catching coronavirus. So, of course, they've ruled out quarantine, because why not have this spread? Why not have this mass hysteria to keep the people's minds and hearts busy while they continue with their own shenanigans politically?
Here's an interesting story. ISIS is advising terrorists to avoid Europe for jihad because of the coronavirus. I mean, maybe that's some good news there.
Well, it's saying, why die of coronavirus when you can die by strapping yourself with a suicide vest, right? You're not going to go out as a martyr if you're taken out by coronavirus. You only go out as a martyr if you take a few innocent people with you. It's so silly to see headlines like these, and of course they're being covered by the mainstream media. I actually tweeted it not too long ago and saying, look, even ISIS is advising that you be pragmatic and not go out there. So, Europe, of course, is being hit very hard with all of this. The countries across Europe are like states for Canada or the United States. They are so small and so close, and people travel so freely and easily across borders. And this has spread, and again, the latency period of this virus being so incredibly long that people have passed it to dozens before even seeing the symptoms within themselves. So, of course, this is an issue with Europe, and ISIS, of course, seizing the opportunities to carry out their jihad over there, saying, don't go there.
Italy's coronavirus cases saw their largest daily jump, Lisa. The death toll in that country now has topped 1,800, but there were almost 3,600 new cases, which made for the biggest one-day increase so far.
Yeah, so outside of China, we know that Italy is the second largest hit country, and they have so many cases and more coming up each day. They don't have the facilities, they're spread thin. They kind of wanted to stop travel outside of Italy and into Italy. But what happened was people were traveling north-south, and then they spread the virus that way as well. So they've done mandatory quarantine at this point, closing down all non-essential businesses, and really encouraging people to stay home so that they do not spread this virus any further than it's already spread in that country.
Meanwhile, in Spain, Lisa, health officials reported the country's death toll from COVID-19 went from 136 to 288 overnight. Apparently, there are close to 7,800 people infected there.
Yes, and it looks like in other countries in Europe, France and Spain being the next two, where it's spreading very quickly as well. Spain saw a very sudden surge, which means that a lot of more cases will be coming up. When we see the sudden surge, it means that there are silent carriers of this virus that are spreading it very quickly. So you only see this, this surge in cases when the latency period is over and people start showing their symptoms. So it's incredibly, incredibly important. I can't say this enough, probably the seventh time I'm saying it in this broadcast, but it's so important to self-quarantine, even if you're not showing any symptoms, because this is how the virus is spreading. And really, our hearts go out to all of Europe and these cities that are particularly burdened with cases and the number of sick people that they can't handle.
The UK, like many regions around the world, Lisa, is looking at a plan to have anyone over the age of 70 isolate from the virus for a number of months. Tell me more about that.
Right, and this is just a thought that's being discussed in the UK, something that California almost has done. Again, if you are over the age of 65, in this case the UK is saying 70, but if you're over the age of 65, and if you have respiratory or cardiovascular issues, that's only compounding your chances of dealing with this virus. If you are immunosuppressed of any age, that also compromises your chances of dealing with the virus. Look, it is a very aggressive respiratory virus. So anybody who is dealing with a heart condition or lung condition, asthma, a weak immune system, and over again the age of 65, well, it's better to be cautious than to put your risk out there. Look, many of these people are either in nursing homes or are retired. So, if you are in that category, then, it's a no-brainer to sit home and what's difficult is that they can't have caregivers. They can't have, their family and their grandchildren and their children visit. They're lonely, and it brings up a slew of other issues for this segment of the population. But again, it's better safe than sorry. They have to really urge them to be cautious and to self-quarantine if possible.
China has apparently launched a coronavirus propaganda drive to help boost their international image by quite a bit. Lisa, that image has taken quite a beating on the international stage.
Absolutely. That's where the virus came from. Before this was ever an issue, when we weren't discussing it in Canada or the United States. We were watching people drop like flies in the middle of the street in Wuhan, dealing with this virus. So it's a reality that they have to deal with. No amount of money that they spend with this propaganda that it started in the United States or it was imported into China is going to really help that change that perception of that reality. Now, we had a hit here, a cyber security hit on the health, not Ministry of Health, but our health organization, the governmental health organization here overnight. And I think that is something that the government is looking into. No fingers have been pointed yet at China, but they are obviously discussing whether or not that could be part of the China propaganda campaign to change the perception again, or to go on the offensive and say, look, it was the United States. This is a continuation of a long, drawn out war of words and actions and tariffs and more, and now viruses between the United States and China, and unfortunately, it continues.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, stay safe.
You too. Thank you.
The climate change debate seems to be ramping up more and more. In Canada, we see protesters staging blockades, resulting in the shutdown of parts of national railway lines. Gregory Wright-Stone is here to discuss climate change. He likes talking about it. He's a geologist and author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Inconvenient Facts. Gregory, welcome to BCN.
Oh, good to have you on. There's so many things to talk about.
Oh, you bet. First of all, let's talk about your book and what you're really hoping to accomplish with it.
Yeah, I did not set out to write a book, which is unusual. Most people sit down and say, I'm going to write a book. I set out to seek the truth. And it was this search for the truth that really led what I found as I started diving into each one of these various aspects of climate change. I frankly, as a geologist, I was just shocked by the level of misinformation that's out there. Just one climate apocalypse description after another just proved not to be so, that the science, the facts, and the data It just didn't back up so much what we were being told. So as I started diving into it, I became more and more angry, and I started talking a lot about it. And people were fascinated with the information that I'm providing, these inconvenient facts that run counter to the notion of what they call the consensus opinion. In other words, it's man-made global warming that's then driving apocalyptic and horrific climate-related events. And I'm a really, really big proponent of the many benefits of modest warming and increased CO2. And we can talk a little bit more and dive into that as we go forward. But that's really my message. You don't get this, is that we've actually got an Earth and its ecosystems that are thriving and benefiting, and humanity's benefiting as a result.
Now, according to many scientists around the world, the Earth is warming at a dangerously high rate with dire consequences. What is your perspective on this? Is the Earth really warming? Is it that much of a serious issue?
It is warming. We're in a warming trend. It's been warming, but the key here is, when did that warming trend start? It started in the late 17th century, bringing us out of the death-dealing cold of what was called the Little Ice Age. Half the population of Iceland perished during that time. A third of the population of the world was thought to have perished during the horrific cold of the Little Ice Age. So this was really a beneficial warming. So it started warming more than 300 years ago, and it's been warming in fits and starts ever since. If we look, the United States really has the best surface temperature data measurement system. They've got one they established in 2003 that gets rid of what's called the urban heat island effect. None of this data from this system has been massaged or manipulated like so many other of the data it has been. And we see here in the United States, I know we're talking to you from Canada, but in the United States, we've seen zero warming. I mean, the temperature is going like this, it's going up and down. But in the last 16 years, we've ended up at the same point we started 16 years ago. I think it's likely to begin warming again here, but it's nothing again that's unusual and unprecedented. And if we look over the last period since the end of the last ice age, we find that there have been 9 other warming periods that look very similar to what we see today. So again, we look back and see that these warming periods are nothing unusual, nothing unprecedented. And I'll tell you one thing that I find fascinating, and a lot of people tell me about my book, the section of the book, is I like to look at human history, human civilization over the last several thousand years and put that into the perspective of climate change. And what we find is that each of the previous warming periods, they're called the Minoan, the Roman warm period, the time of Christ, the medieval warm period, each one of these warming periods, similar to what we have today, all were associated with increases in civilizations, technology, food was plentiful, and these were warmer periods, just opposite of what we're being told, isn't it? We're being told fear the heat, when actually each one of the intervening cold periods were marked by famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. And again, it's just opposite of what we're being told. So there's a great correlation between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of civilizations. Fear the cold.
Is an increased amount of CO2 really bad for the Earth? We hear all of the time how it's important to cut down on our carbon footprint.
No, and in fact, if you would look on the back of my white SUV, I've got a bumper sticker that says "I love CO2," and I was at the gym this morning wearing my "I Heart CO2" T-shirt. So no, I'm a huge proponent of the many benefits of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide's fueling plant and crop growth. Carbon dioxide increases means that each of the plants don't need as much water. Think about it. Because of the CO2, there's the photosynthesis process. They use CO2. With more CO2 in the atmosphere, they don't have to, what we call transpiration, it's breathing in and out. They don't have to, because they don't need to do that because there's so much more CO2. And that means they're not losing water. They're not sucking it out of the ground. And again, what's fascinating, we don't hear about it, but because they're not using as much water, that leaves more water in the soil. Increased soil moisture is leading thought to be part of what's leading to a decrease in forest fires and a decrease in drought. Again, just opposite of what you're being told and what the media promotes. It's crazy. It's just one thing after another. We're being it's being misrepresented to you and your listeners.
Do we have an accurate way of knowing how much CO2 is actually in our atmosphere is man-made as opposed to the CO2 that comes from natural sources?
Well, we've increased CO2. We're at about, I'm not going to throw out a bunch of numbers, but we're at about 410 parts per million right now. So we've increased 130 parts per million since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. If we look at it throughout Earth's history, though, we find, again, we're at 400, more or less, a little bit over 400. Throughout all of Earth's history, the average CO2 levels were 2,600 parts per million. 2,600, 6.5 times what we are today. And plants, ecosystems thrived. And so if you really look at it, we're actually, compared to Earth's history, and as a geologist, that's what I do. If you put it in the big perspective, we don't have too much CO2. We don't have enough. We're actually CO2 impoverished. And again, it's fueling Dr. Craig Idso and his team of researchers have done laboratory studies to determine what exactly, he used a 300 part per million increase in CO2. What would that do to plant and crop growth? And he looked at crops that represent 95% of the crops that we rely on for sustenance. And he found that some benefit more, some less. They all benefit to some degree. But the average was an increase of 46% of biomass, the weight of crop growth. That's a good thing. That's not just a good thing, it's a really good thing. And because of increased CO2, we can feed the hungry. And around the world, people are benefiting from this. And that's a really, really, really good thing. I'm a senior fellow at the Cornwall Alliance, which is a Christian group. And the overarching theme that I use, and I've kind of adopted it from them, is this belief that we should use all of Earth's resources, or what they would say all of God's creation, for the betterment of mankind, and do it as good stewards. And that's a really simple way for your viewers to look at this. We want to use all of Earth's resources for the betterment of mankind and do it as good stewards. And that's a tremendous philosophy. Instead of what we see here are so many people, leadership of countries and other groups that are promoting things like the Green New Deal, things like the Paris Climate Accords, that would actually impact and harm the people of Canada and the people of the United States and the people of the Western world by making everything, their intention and their goal from each one of these is to increase energy costs, which would then increase costs for everybody. And energy costs, when you do that, that's really a regressive taxation system and by that I mean it impacts the poorest among us the most.
Has there been any research done, though, on the alarming climate change predictions that have actually come true over the past 2 or 3 decades? Do we have any statistics on that?
Well, I can't give you statistics, but I've got a laundry list that's now going well into the second page of, I'm working on my second book, and that'll be part of it is kind of an addendum of the failed climate change forecasts that have just gone wrong. And before I came on here, I did some research and used the model for the assessment of greenhouse gas induced climate change. It's a big name, but the acronym is the MAGIC, MAGICC simulator. And I used the IPCC's own calculations to determine if Canada reduced 100% of its CO2 emissions, how much warming would be averted. And again, this is using their own calculations. So what they want Canada to do is to impose economically crippling sanctions, regulations, taxes, in order to drive down. And I'll read you off here. Canada, the temperature, amount of temperature that would be averted would be 0.06 of a degree centigrade by the year 2050, and it gets better, 1/100th of a degree centigrade by the year 2100. How many jobs lost in Canada is that worth? I'll tell you how many. 0. For 1/100th of a degree centigrade by the year 2100. And that's what they're after. And this is using their own calculations. And I know you would join with me by shaking your head and going, why in the world would we do this? It's crazy. We just see all these negatives. Every one of your viewers' personal liberties would be infringed even more than they are today.
You know what? Maybe a lot of it's to do with the money. You got to follow the money. That's what my father used to say. Look at a lot of the Hollywood movies, the propaganda that they're pushing. They make big bucks off of it. Green technology. I mean, it's multi-billion-dollar industry. It's huge.
Yeah, it is. And I shake my head sometimes when I look at these things. I'm just asking myself, why are they doing it? That's really getting, I have to take off my geologist, scientist hat and put on my political science hat. And I get asked this question, well, you're telling us we're being lied to. Why are they doing it? I mean, you're just as qualified as I am. And everyone watching this is just as qualified as I am to come up with reasons why they're doing it. We can talk about taxation. It's going to be this big pot of money for each government. They like that. Greater control, is it turning more of the responsibility over to the UN? I don't know. It's always a good question. What I try and do when I get asked that question, but why, I always say, well, I'm a scientist and I can show you the science, the facts, and the data that says they're lying about this, they're lying about that. The media says this, and I can show the data that disputes it. And there's some, probably one of the ones that was so obvious and really, really irritated me was this. Back in November, the United Nations issued this report on a pending mass extinction. And they reported that up to 1 million species would go extinct over the next several decades. Well, for that to happen, you'd have to have 25,000 to 30,000 species go extinct per year. Well, I went back, my alarm started going off when I read this. And I went back and I said, okay, I went back and looked at the exact same data the UN used. The UN only looked at one data point per century and then added one on top of the other. Their chart looked like it looked really scary. I went back and looked at the same data on a decade by decade basis to show a significant decline for the last 120 years, completely opposite of what the UN. And remember I said you needed up to 30,000 extinctions per year? You know what it's been for the last 40 years? Two extinctions per year, not 2,000, not 200, 2 extinctions per year. And they're going to say, oh, well, we'll get to 30,000 pretty soon. No, we won't. No, we won't. And the big story from that UN study should have been, oh, we're going into this mass extinction event. What they should have said, we're doing as humanity, we're doing a really, really good job protecting our endangered species, and we should be proud of it.
Teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg will be the focus of a forthcoming BBC documentary series. Gregory, should young people on the other side of the debate also have their voices heard?
They should, but one should also have it based on science and fact. There's so much of what she thinks she knows that's incorrect. And there's so much about the climate change science that she's just blissfully unaware of. Or maybe, and I think she is. I'm not going to impugn her with, but I will say I might have been wrong about her for the last several months. I've been calling her anti-capitalist, but she just signed this lucrative deal to do this documentary, so maybe she is a capitalist after all. The people in the BBC that are funding the BBC are outraged about this. And the funny thing is, this documentary will be on her, and it's being done under their science, the aegis of the science part of the BBC for this documentary on climate. It would be like saying, I compare it to doing a documentary on Thomas the Tank Engine and calling that a documentary on the history of railroads in Canada. There's going to be very little science, but a lot of political spin.
Gregory Wrightstone is a geologist and author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Inconvenient Facts. Thanks for joining me today from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at PCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.